The world dissolved into a piercing shriek of tearing flesh and the guttural roar of the man she was sworn to kill. Ilara felt the arrow before she understood she had moved, a searing agony exploding through her shoulder as the barbed, poison-laced tip bit deep into bone. Her body, already starved and weary from weeks of battle, slammed against the hard chest of Alpha King Lycan. His scent, pine, winter frost, and raw power flooded her senses as his arms reflexively caught her, breaking her fall. Through a haze of shock, her gaze met his. His eyes, the color of molten gold, were wide with a stunning, savage confusion. He was the enemy, the tyrant who had razed her village and scattered her pack to the winds. And she, a nameless Omega fighting for the Sunstone rebels, had just taken the death meant for him. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. The battlefield faded into a muted cacophony. The clang of steel, the snarls of shifting wolves, the cries of the dying, it all became a distant hum beneath the thunder of Lycan's heart against her ear. He held her, this monster of a man, his grip like iron bands around her frail form. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so deep it vibrated through her own bones. Not of anger, but of something far more terrifying: possession. "Why?" he snarled, his voice a blade of gravel against her skin. She had no answer. Her mind was a whirlwind of instinct and regret. She had seen the glint of the archer's arrowhead from the ridge, had seen it aimed squarely at the unarmored gap in the Alpha King's pauldron as he cut down one of her own. Her body had moved on its own accord, a betrayal of her cause, her people, her hatred. The black-fletched arrow was from a sunstone quiver, a traitor's arrow. Her own side had tried to kill him, and she had saved him. The irony was a poison far more potent than the one now seeping into her veins. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision, the pain a rising tide threatening to pull her under. His golden eyes were the last thing she saw, burning with a question that had no logical answer. Then he roared, a sound of pure, untamed alpha fury that silenced the entire battlefield, and scooped her limp body into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. He stalked from the field of slaughter, carrying his enemy, his savior, leaving both armies frozen in a state of stunned disbelief. Ilara woke to the scent of antiseptic herbs and coarse linen. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from her shoulder, a constant reminder of her inexplicable act of treason. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim, flickering light of an oil lamp. She was in a tent, Spartan and military, the canvas walls doing little to muffle the sounds of a bustling war camp. The Shadow Moon pack. His pack. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was a prisoner. She tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of agony shot through her, and she fell back against the thin mattress with a choked gasp. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the tent. King Lycan loomed over her, his immense frame eclipsing the lamplight. He was stripped of his battle armor, dressed in simple black trousers and a tunic that strained against the formidable muscles of his chest and arms. His face was a mask of granite, his jaw tight, those molten eyes narrowed as they studied her. He looked less like a king and more like the predator he was. "You're awake," he stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. The healers managed to draw out most of the nightshade venom. Another hour and it would have stopped your heart. She stared at him, her own heart hammering against her ribs. He saved her? The man she'd spent the last year fighting? The butcher of Silver Creek? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Why? She whispered, her throat raw. That's my question, he countered, taking a step closer. The air grew thick, charged with his sheer presence. He was an alpha of alphas, his power a physical weight that pressed down on her, demanding submission. It was a power she had resisted her entire life. My men have you identified. Elara of the Silver Creek Pack, a refugee, now a soldier for the Sunstone Rebels. You fight to see me dead. So I ask you again, Rebel, why did you take an arrow meant for me? Her mind reeled. Silver Creek. The name was a ghost on her tongue, a memory of home, of family, of everything he had taken from her. A bitter, hot anger surged through her, momentarily eclipsing her fear. I don't know, she spat, the words tasting like ash. Lycan's lip curled into a sneer. A mistake. You threw yourself in front of a fatal shot? That is not a mistake. That is a choice. Was it a desperate bid for mercy? Did you think saving my life would earn you a pardon? He leaned down, bracing his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. His scent was overwhelming now, an intoxicating and terrifying blend of power and masculinity. Something deep inside her, something primal and wolf, stirred in response. It was a flicker of recognition, a pull toward this man that she could not comprehend and immediately despised. I want no mercy from you, she hissed, forcing herself to meet his piercing gaze. I want nothing from you. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his golden eyes searching hers, delving past the defiance, past the pain, into something she kept locked away even from herself. A muscle feathered in his jaw. You lie, he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft tone. Every wolf wants something. Survival, vengeance, power. You are no different. I will find out what it is you truly want. I will peel back every layer of your pathetic rebellion until I have the truth. He straightened up, his shadow falling away. Rest. Heal. You are no good to me dead. When you are strong enough, we will talk again, and you will give me the answers I seek. Make no mistake, little wolf, you are my prisoner now. Your life is mine to do with as I please. He turned and swept out of the tent, leaving her alone with the throbbing in her shoulder and the chilling echo of his promise. She was trapped, a broken-winged bird in the cage of the Wolf King. And worse, a treacherous part of her, a part she hadn't known existed until she met his eyes, felt not revulsion, but a terrifying, inexplicable spark of connection to her captor. The days that followed were a blur of pain, feverish dreams, and simmering dread. The healers of the Shadow Moon Pack were efficient but cold, their hands tending to her wound with a detached professionalism that bordered on contempt. They would speak over her in low, gruff tones, their words barbs meant to wound as much as any blade. The king's pet rebel, wasting precious herbs on this filth. He should have let her die. Elara learned to block them out, retreating into the fortress of her own mind. She'd survived starvation after her pack was destroyed. She'd survived the brutal training camps of the Sunstone Rebels. She would survive this. She had to. Her only contact with her captor was his silent, brooding presence. He would appear at the entrance of her tent each evening, a hulking silhouette against the dying light. He never spoke, but his eyes would rake over her, assessing her recovery, his expression unreadable. She felt like a specimen under glass, a puzzle he was determined to solve. The feeling of being watched was unnerving, but more unnerving was the strange solace she found in it. His presence, however menacing, was a constant in the shifting uncertainties of her imprisonment. It was a focal point for her anger, a solid wall against which she could brace her own crumbling resolve. One night, a nightmare dragged her back to the fall of Silver Creek. The scent of smoke and blood, the screams of her family, the sight of the Shadow Moon banner, Black Wolf on a field of silver, being raised over their burning homes. She woke up thrashing, a scream caught in her throat, her body drenched in a cold sweat. Lycan was there, inside the tent, moving with a predator's silent grace. He hadn't been there moments before. He must have heard her. Before she could react, he sat on the edge of her cot, his weight making the simple frame groan. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a shock to her system. "A bad dream?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. She flinched away, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin like a shield. "It's none of your concern. When you are on my land, in my camp, your well-being is my concern," he said, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "I am not a monster, Ilara." The use of her name, the first time he had spoken it, sent a strange shiver down her spine. "Aren't you?" she shot back, her voice trembling with a grief so profound it was almost rage. "The people of Silver Creek would disagree. My parents would disagree." His jaw tightened, and the fleeting warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar coldness of a king at war. "War is filled with tragedy. Your pack refused to bend the knee. They chose defiance. They paid the price. They chose freedom. They chose death," he corrected, his voice flat and hard. "The Sunstone rebels offer you a different kind of servitude, dressed up in pretty words like freedom and justice. They prey on the desperate, the broken, like you." His words hit too close to home. She had joined the rebels not out of some grand political conviction, but out of sheer desperation. They had offered food, shelter, and a target for her all-consuming rage. They had offered her a purpose when she had none. "You know nothing about me," she whispered. "I know that you are an Omega who fights like a Beta, with the heart of an Alpha. I know that you saved the life of your greatest enemy for a reason you yourself cannot comprehend. And I know," he said, his voice dropping again, becoming a low, intimate murmur that vibrated through the small space between them, "that there is a power in you that you are not even aware of. A fire. I saw it in your eyes on the battlefield." He stood abruptly, the moment of connection shattered. "The healers say you will be well enough to walk in 2 days. Then your interrogation will begin in earnest." He turned to leave, pausing at the tent flap. "Get some sleep. The ghosts of the past cannot be fought in the dark." He was gone, leaving her breathless and confused. He was a tyrant, a killer, but he had shown her a sliver of something else. A man burdened by his own war, a king who saw more in her than just a rebel soldier. And that, she realized with a sinking heart, was more dangerous than his anger could ever be. Because if she started to see the man beneath the monster, how could she possibly continue to hate him? How could she hold on to the one thing that had kept her alive for so long? Her hatred was her armor, and he was, piece by piece, beginning to strip it away, leaving her vulnerable and exposed in the heart of the enemy's den. 2 days later, as promised, 2 guards hauled Ilara from her tent. Her legs were unsteady, but her will was a rod of iron. They dragged her not to a dungeon or an interrogation cell, but to the king's command tent, a sprawling structure of dark leather and canvas at the center of the camp. Inside, maps covered a massive wooden table, and the air smelled of wood smoke and steel. Lycan stood before the table, his back to her, studying the charts of the contested territories. Kale, his beta and second-in-command, stood beside him, his arms crossed and a permanent scowl etched on his face. Kale's pale blue eyes locked onto Ilara with undisguised venom. He had been against bringing her into the camp from the start, arguing loudly that she was a spy, a Trojan horse. Lycan turned, his golden gaze sweeping over her. He dismissed the guards with a flick of his wrist. "Leave us." The guards bowed and retreated, leaving her alone with the two most powerful wolves in the Shadowmoon pack. The oppressive weight of their combined alpha and beta dominance was suffocating. "The prisoner is well enough to stand, my king," Kale said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Perhaps she is now ready to tell us the names of her commanders, the location of her rebel cells." Lycan ignored him, his focus solely on Ilara. "I have a proposal for you, Ilara of Silver Creek." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. A proposal? She had expected threats, torture, not negotiation. "I have no interest in your proposals," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Kale growled low in his throat, but Lycan silenced him with a glance. "Hear me out," the king continued, his tone reasonable, almost gentle. "You possess knowledge of the Sunstone rebels, their tactics, their supply lines, their morale. This information is valuable to me. In exchange for your cooperation, I will guarantee your safety. You will be given food, shelter, and my personal protection. You will no longer be a prisoner, but a guest in my camp." Ilara stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to be a traitor?" "You saved my life," Lycan countered. "In the eyes of your commander, Silas, you are already a traitor. Do you think he would welcome you back with open arms after what you did?" The name Silas sent a chill down her spine. Silas was the charismatic, ruthless leader of the Sunstone Rebellion. He demanded absolute loyalty. Lycan was right. There was no going back for her. "So this is my choice?" she asked bitterly. "Betray the people who gave me a home? Or what? You'll have me executed?" Lycan's expression was grim. "My council demands your head. Kale here would be the first to volunteer to take it. They see you as a threat, an assassin who failed. I am the only one standing between you and the headsman's axe." "You are a fool, Lycan," Kale snarled, finally breaking his silence. "This is a trick. She is playing you. She is feeding you lies to save her own skin. She's an Omega. They are naturally deceitful." Ilara's temper flared. "I am not deceitful, and my rank has nothing to do with my honor." "Honor?" Kale laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You speak of honor? You rebels who use poison and ambush tactics? You who hide among civilians? You have no honor." Before she could retort, Lycan stepped between them, his body a solid wall. He faced his beta, his eyes flashing with warning. "Enough, Kale. I will not have you speak to her that way." Kale's jaw dropped. He stared at his king, his friend, in stunned disbelief. "You defend her?" "I am making a strategic decision," Lycan said, his voice cold and commanding. "Her intelligence could end this war and save hundreds of my pack's lives. I will not allow your prejudice to interfere with that. Do you understand me?" Kale's face was a thunderous mask of fury and betrayal. He held Lycan's gaze for a tense moment before giving a stiff, almost insubordinate nod. "As you command, my king." He shot Ilara one last look of pure hatred before turning on his heel and storming out of the tent. Ilara was left reeling. The Alpha King had just defended her, an Omega rebel, against his own second-in-command. The power dynamics of this camp were more complex than she had imagined. Lycan turned back to her, his expression unreadable once more.
The offer stands, Alara. Help me end this war. Help me save lives on both sides. Silas is leading you all to ruin. You must see that."
She looked at the maps, at the lines denoting armies and territories. It was a war she had never wanted, a fight for survival that had been twisted into something ugly and hateful. She thought of the young, desperate faces in the rebel camp, fed on Silas's promises of a better world, a world free of the Alpha King's tyranny. But Lycan's words echoed in her mind. Had she really been fighting for freedom? Or had she just been a pawn in another wolf's game of power? "I need time," she whispered. "I need to think." "You have until sunrise," Lycan said. "But know this, whatever you decide, your fate is now intertwined with mine. When you shielded me, you tied your life to my own. That is a bond not easily broken." He left her then, alone in the vast tent, surrounded by the silent testament of his war. Her choice was stark: cling to a loyalty that would see her dead, or trust the enemy who had shown her an unexpected and deeply unsettling sliver of mercy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Ilara knew that her life, the one she had known, was already over. A new one, fraught with peril and impossible choices, was just beginning. Life in the Shadow Moon camp transformed overnight. After a long, sleepless night, Ilara had given Lycan her conditional acceptance. She would provide intelligence on Silas's operations, but she would not reveal the names of low-level fighters or the locations of refugee shelters. To her surprise, Lycan had agreed without argument. She was moved from the healer's tent to a small, private tent of her own, near the king's. She was given new clothes, clean and warm, and her rations were no longer the scraps of a prisoner, but the hearty fare of a pack member. The open hostility of the camp, however, did not lessen. It intensified. She was a constant target of suspicious glares, whispered insults, and outright contempt. Kale, in particular, made his displeasure known, often stationing himself near her tent, his glare a physical force of intimidation. Yet for every hostile wolf, there was now the unyielding shield of the king's protection. His decree was absolute. Ilara was not to be harmed or harassed. Any who disobeyed would answer directly to him. This protection created a strange, isolating bubble around her. She was no longer a prisoner, but she was far from an ally. She was an anomaly, the king's obsession, a creature of distrust living in the shadow of the throne. Lycan began to summon her to his command tent daily. These sessions were ostensibly for gathering intelligence, but they often veered into something more personal. He would ask about her life in Silver Creek before the war, about her family, about her hopes. She answered in clipped, reluctant sentences, building her walls as high as she could. But he was patient, persistent, chipping away at her defenses with carefully chosen questions. One afternoon, as she was describing a trade route Silas used for smuggling weapons, a memory surfaced. "We used to pick berries along that route as children," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Moonberries. They only grow in the shade of the old oaks there. My mother, she used to make the sweetest pies." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. It was a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the girl she had been before the war. Lycan stopped tracing the line on the map. He looked at her, his golden eyes holding a profound sadness. "My mother did as well," he said, quietly. "She said the secret was a pinch of winterbloom honey." The shared memory, so simple and unexpected, hung in the air between them. For a fleeting second, he was not the fearsome Alpha King, and she was not the rebel Omega. They were just two people who missed their mothers. The connection was so potent, so real, that it terrified her. She quickly shut down, her expression hardening. "That's all I remember about the route." Lycan did not press.
He simply nodded and returned to the map, but the atmosphere in the tent had changed. The line between them had blurred, and they both knew it. Their proximity was a constant, simmering source of tension. An accidental brush of hands as they leaned over the map would send a jolt of electricity through her, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. His scent was a permanent fixture in her senses, a primal call to her own dormant wolf. She fought it, hated it, but could not deny it. This pull was a deeper betrayal than saving his life. It was a betrayal of her own heart. One evening, a fierce storm rolled in, the wind tearing at the canvas tents and the rain falling in blinding sheets. The clap of thunder was deafening, shaking the very ground. Ilara, who had always hated storms, sat huddled in her tent, wrapping her arms around her knees. Each thunderclap was like the roar of cannon fire, each flash of lightning like the muzzle flare of a rifle. It threw her back into the chaos of battle, the terror, the loss. A particularly violent crash of thunder made her cry out, the sound swallowed by the storm. The flap of her tent was thrown open, and Lycan was there, his hair and clothes plastered to his body by the rain. He took in her trembling form in a single glance. "The storm," he said, his voice a low anchor in the tempest. She nodded, unable to speak, hating her own weakness. He crossed the small space and sat before her, not touching, but creating a solid, unshakable presence that seemed to push back against the chaos outside. "When I was a boy," he began, his voice calm and steady, "my father, the old king, would take me to the highest peak of the Shadowmoon Mountains during the worst storms. He said a king could not fear the sky's rage. He said we had to become the storm, to match its power with our own." He spoke for hours, telling her stories of his childhood, of the burdens of his crown, of the loneliness of being the Alpha King. He spoke not as a king to a prisoner, but as a man to a woman. He didn't ask for her secrets, he offered his own. And as the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm inside Ilara began to calm. She saw him, truly saw him for the first time. She saw the weight he carried, the pain he concealed behind a mask of ruthless efficiency. The man and the monster were one and the same, and the revelation was both devastating and liberating. As the first light of dawn broke, the storm finally passed. Lycan stood to leave. At the tent flap, he paused. "You are not weak, Ilara," he said softly. "You have a strength you don't recognize, the strength to endure, the strength to protect." He left, and Ilara was left with the echo of his words and the undeniable truth that her feelings for the Alpha King were changing. The black and white lines of her world, of enemy and ally, of hatred and something else, were dissolving into 1,000 shades of gray. The battle for the territories might be raging outside the camp, but the most dangerous battle was the one now being fought within the confines of her own heart. The fragile truce between them was shattered by the cry of a sentry's horn. "Attack!" The sound ripped through the pre-dawn quiet, followed by a chorus of war cries and the snarls of shifting wolves. Ilara's blood ran cold. She scrambled from her tent to see chaos erupting at the western perimeter of the camp. Figures clad in the brown and green of the Sunstone rebels were pouring over the barricades. It was a surprise attack, a rescue, for her. The thought filled her not with relief, but with pure dread. Lycan's warriors, caught off guard but disciplined, formed a defensive line, shifting into their massive wolf forms. The air filled with the scent of blood and rage.
Lycan was at the forefront, a colossal black wolf, his fangs bared as he tore through the enemy ranks. He was a force of nature, a terrifying and magnificent beast of war. Ilara was frozen, trapped between two sides that both claimed her and would likely see her killed. "Ilara, to me!" A voice cut through the din. She turned to see Silas, the leader of the Sunstone Rebellion, striding toward her, flanked by two of his elite guards. He was handsome, charismatic, his smile a weapon he wielded as effectively as the sword at his hip. It was the same smile that had convinced her to join his cause. Now it looked predatory. "We've come for you, little bird," he said, his eyes sweeping over her clean clothes and healed shoulder. "It seems the Wolf King has been treating you well. Too well, perhaps." "Silas," she breathed, her mind racing. "What is this? How did you find me?" "I have my ways," he said with a dismissive wave. "The question is, why are you still here? Why haven't you escaped? Or better yet, why haven't you put a knife in the king's back while he slept?" His tone was light, but his eyes were hard as flint. The implication was clear. He had expected her to be an assassin. "I was injured," she said defensively. "I couldn't." "You could have done something," he interrupted, his smile vanishing. "But instead, you play the part of the pampered captive. I must admit, I'm disappointed." A movement over Silas's shoulder caught her eye. It was Lycan, back in his human form. Blood splattered across his face and chest. He was fighting his way toward them, his golden eyes blazing with a fury she had never seen before. He was coming for her. "We have to go," Silas said, grabbing her arm. His grip was like a vice. "My men will cover our retreat." "No," she said, trying to pull away. Something was wrong. This didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like an abduction. "I'm not going with you." Silas's face darkened. That wasn't a request. He began to drag her back toward the breach in the defenses. It was then that she saw it, the archer on the ridge, the same ridge as before. It was the same man, she was sure of it. He was nocking an arrow, but he wasn't aiming at Lycan. He was aiming at Silas, at her. Suddenly, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The arrow that hit her was never meant for Lycan. It was meant to make it look like she was saving him. The attack, this rescue, it was all theater. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with dawning horror as she looked at Silas. "The arrow on the battlefield, you planned it. You wanted me to get captured." Silas stopped, his lips twisting into a cruel smirk. The charismatic mask fell away, revealing the monster beneath. "Clever girl," he hissed. "Of course I planned it. The perfect pawn. A martyr if you died, a double agent if you lived. Your heroic act was meant to sow chaos, to make the Alpha King question his own senses. And now, your rescue and subsequent death at his hands will turn you into a symbol that will fuel our rebellion for years to come. You were always disposable, Ilara." The confession was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Every sacrifice, every ounce of her loyalty, every moment of her suffering, it was all based on a lie. She wasn't a soldier for a noble cause. She was a lamb being led to the slaughter by a wolf who pretended to be a shepherd. Heartbreak, sharp and absolute, tore through her. At that moment, Lycan broke through the last of Silas's guards, his roar of fury shaking the ground. He saw the look on Ilara's face, saw Silas's cruel grip on her arm, and he understood. The truth hit him with the force of a physical impact. She wasn't a traitor. She was a victim. A pawn in a game far more twisted than he had imagined. The realization ignited something primal within him,
A fierce, untamable wave of protectiveness washed over him, so powerful it was suffocating. The strange pull he'd felt, the inexplicable connection, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth that his wolf screamed into his soul. Mate! The word exploded in his mind, a revelation that changed everything. This rebel Omega, this broken, betrayed girl, was his mate, and Silas had his hands on her. "Get away from her," Lycan snarled, his voice dropping to a deathly calm that was more terrifying than any shout. Silas laughed, shoving Alara toward Lycan. "Take her. She's tainted now. The king's whore. She's of no use to me anymore." He turned and fled as his remaining forces converged to cover his escape. The rebels fought with the desperation of fanatics, creating a wall of bodies between their leader and the enraged Alpha King. Lycan didn't pursue. His entire world had narrowed to the trembling woman standing before him. Alara looked at him, her eyes wide with shock and a grief so profound it shattered his heart. She was truly alone now, cast aside by the very people she had fought for. He took a tentative step toward her, his hands open, his expression stripped of all its royal authority, showing only the raw vulnerability of a man who had just found the other half of his soul in the midst of a battlefield. The attack was repelled, the rebels driven back into the woods, but the camp was in turmoil. The trust that had been fractured by Alara's presence was now completely broken. She was the eye of a hurricane of suspicion and fear, and Lycan had just realized she was the anchor of his entire world. Lycan's declaration echoed through the stunned silence of his war council. "She is under my personal protection. Anyone who raises a hand or a voice against her will answer to me. Am I understood?" He stood before them, not as their king, but as a male protecting his territory, his eyes sweeping over the faces of his most trusted advisors. Kale, his face pale with rage, stepped forward. "Lycan, you cannot be serious." The camp was just attacked because of her. Silas came for her. She is a liability, a spy who has compromised our entire operation. Silas used her, Lycan countered, his voice like flint. I heard him admit it myself. She is a victim in this, not a conspirator. Or that's what she wants you to think, Kale shot back. You are blinded, my friend. This Omega has bewitched you somehow. You are not thinking clearly. My thoughts have never been clearer, Lycan said, his gaze unwavering. My decision is final. The dismissal was absolute. The council members shuffled out, murmuring amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dissent. Kale was the last to leave. He paused at the tent flap, his voice low and pained. Be careful, Lycan. The throne has been lost for less than this. The warning hung in the air long after he was gone. Lycan knew the risk he was taking. He was alienating his commanders, his pack, for a woman they saw as the enemy. But the bond, now that it was recognized, was an undeniable force. Protecting Alara was as essential as breathing. He found her by the edge of a small stream that ran through the camp, staring into the water as if searching for answers in its murky depths. She looked broken, her spirit hollowed out by Silas's betrayal. He approached slowly, his heavy footfalls announcing his presence. She didn't look up. They all hate me, she said, her voice flat and lifeless. They wish you had let me die. I don't, he said, stopping beside her, and their opinions do not matter. She gave a bitter, humorless laugh. I have nothing left. My pack is gone. My cause was a lie. I am a wolf with no territory, no allegiance. An Omega alone. I am the weakest thing in these woods." "No," he said, his voice firm. He knelt beside her, forcing her to look at him. His golden eyes were intense, earnest. "You have endured what would have broken most alphas. You have survived, Ilara. That is not weakness." That is a rare and formidable strength. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that pierced through the cold fog of her despair. Her breath hitched. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Lycan hesitated. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. The pack would never accept it. She would not accept it. She would see it as another form of possession, another cage. He had to earn her trust first, her heart. "Because I was wrong about you," he said, his voice a low, sincere rumble. "I have spent this war seeing only soldiers, not people. I saw a rebel, not a woman who had lost everything. Silas used your pain, your loyalty. I will not make the same mistake." He began a slow, patient courtship, a silent campaign to win the war for her soul. He brought her meals himself, simple stews and roasted meats, sitting with her in comfortable silence as she ate. He told her more stories of his kingdom, not of its wars and conquests, but of its people, its traditions, its beauty. He spoke of the spring festival in the capital, the deep winter hunts, the quiet wisdom of the pack elders. He painted a picture of a world beyond the conflict, a world she could be a part of. Slowly, cautiously, Ilara began to respond. She started to ask questions, her curiosity a tiny green shoot pushing through barren ground. She revealed small pieces of herself, her love for stargazing, her talent for sketching with charcoal on scraps of bark, her fear of deep water. Each confession was a gift he treasured. During one of their intelligence sessions, while studying maps of the Northern Territories, Ilara's finger traced a path through the treacherous deadwood. "Silas spoke of this place," she murmured, a flicker of memory in her eyes. "He was boasting to his inner circle. He said he had acquired something from the shadow weavers who live there, an artifact." He called it the heart of corruption. Lycan went still. The shadow weavers were a coven of banished witches who dealt in forbidden dark magic. "What does this artifact do?" he asked, his voice grim. "I don't know for sure," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But from what I overheard, it poisons the land. And any shifter who draws on the poisoned earth for their power, it twists their wolf, makes them feral, uncontrollable. It turns them into monsters." A cold dread settled in Lycan's stomach. This was Silas's endgame. Not to win a war of attrition, but to unleash a plague that would destroy the Shadow Moon pack from within. "He plans to use it on the capital," Lycan realized aloud. "During the winter solstice, when my people are gathered and the connection to the packlands is strongest." "He said he would make your wolves devour you," Ilara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. This was it, the key to ending the war. Ilara's knowledge was no longer just a strategic advantage. It was the only thing that could save them from annihilation. She had gone from being his prisoner to his confidant, from his enemy to his most crucial ally. In the days that followed, the dynamic in the command tent shifted. It was no longer a king interrogating a source. It was two commanders planning a campaign. Ilara's intimate knowledge of Silas's psychology and rebel tactics, combined with Lycan's military prowess, allowed them to formulate a daring plan, a preemptive strike on Silas's hidden stronghold in the Deadwood.
As they worked late into the night, their heads bent close over the maps. The bond between them hummed, a powerful undercurrent beneath the surface of their conversations. The line between duty and desire had ceased to exist. He was falling in love with her spirit, her resilience, her mind. And she, against all reason, was beginning to see him not as a king or an enemy, but as a man she could trust, a man she could care for.
The night before they were to march, Lycan found her staring up at the full moon, its silver light bathing her in an ethereal glow. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Yes," she admitted without hesitation, "but not of the fighting. I'm afraid of what comes after." "After, we rebuild," he said, standing beside her. "Together." He reached out and took her hand. His was large and warm, enveloping hers completely. It felt like coming home. She didn't pull away. "Lycan," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The way you look at me." He turned to face her, his gaze intense, burning with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I look at you," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "and I see my future. I see my queen." The confession hung in the air, more powerful than any battle cry. Before she could process it, he leaned in and captured her lips with his own. The kiss was not rough or demanding, but breathtakingly tender, a desperate, soul-deep expression of everything that had grown between them in the heart of war. It was a promise of hope, a claim on a future neither of them had dared to dream of. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. The war was not yet won, but in that moment, under the light of the moon, they had already claimed the only victory that mattered. The deadwood was a place of gnarled, skeletal trees and unnatural silence. The air was heavy, smelling of decay and old magic. Lycan led his elite warriors, a hand-picked group of his most loyal fighters, through the oppressive gloom. Ilara rode beside him, her face set with grim determination. She was their guide, their secret weapon. Kale, resentful but obedient, followed a pace behind, his eyes constantly darting toward Ilara, his mistrust a palpable force. According to Ilara's intelligence, Silas's stronghold was in a network of caves hidden behind a waterfall of black, stagnant water. As they approached, the sense of dark magic grew stronger, a nauseating pressure against the senses.
Lycan gave the signal to halt. "The entrance should be just ahead," Ilara whispered, her voice tight. "His patrols are sporadic but ruthless. He'll have sentries posted in the high rocks." As if summoned by her words, an arrow hissed out of the darkness, embedding itself in a tree just inches from Lycan's head. An ambush. Rebel soldiers poured from the shadows, their eyes glowing with a faint, sickly green light. They fought with a reckless, feral intensity. "The artifact!" Lycan roared. "He's already using it!" The Shadow Moon warriors shifted, their powerful wolf forms a stark contrast to the corrupted, crazed shifters they faced. Lycan was a black whirlwind of claws and teeth, fighting to protect his men, his eyes constantly seeking out Ilara. He had ordered her to stay back, but the fighting was too chaotic, too widespread. Kale, his judgment clouded by his hatred for Ilara, made a fatal error. Seeing a group of rebels breaking through the line near where Ilara had taken cover, he abandoned his position to charge them, yelling, "It's a trap! She led us into a trap!" His move left Lycan's flank exposed. Silas chose that moment to emerge from the mouth of the cave. He was no longer the handsome, charismatic leader. His skin was pale, his veins visible as black lines beneath the surface, and he held a pulsating, crystalline object in his hand, the heart of corruption. It pulsed with a malevolent green light that mirrored the madness in his eyes.
"Welcome, King," Silas sneered, his voice distorted and echoing. "You've come just in time to watch your world die." He aimed the artifact at Lycan, and a beam of pure, corrosive energy shot out. Lycan dodged, but the beam struck the ground where he had stood, and the earth turned black and withered, the very stones seeming to scream. Lycan was cornered, forced to constantly evade the artifact's deadly power while fending off two of Silas's corrupted guards. He needed an opening, just a second. He saw Kyle struggling, overwhelmed, finally realizing his folly. He saw his men fighting a losing battle against wolves who no longer felt pain. And he saw Ilara. She was not cowering. Her eyes were alight with a fierce, desperate intelligence. She met his gaze across the clearing, and in that split second, a silent understanding passed between them. She wasn't a trained warrior, but she was a survivor. She grabbed a fallen rebel's satchel and hurled it with all her might at a precariously balanced pile of rocks on a ledge above the cave entrance. The satchel, weighted with ammunition, struck its mark. With a groan, the rocks gave way, triggering a small avalanche of stone and debris that rained down directly in front of the cave, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and momentarily obscuring Silas's view. It was the opening Lycan needed. With a roar, he launched himself through the dust cloud, tackling Silas before the mad wolf could react. The heart of corruption flew from Silas's grasp, skittering across the stony ground. The two alphas, one fueled by righteous fury and the other by dark magic, crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Silas was unnaturally strong, his corrupted power giving him the edge. His fingers closed around Lycan's throat, squeezing, a triumphant, insane grin on his face. Lycan's vision started to spot. Just as his strength began to fail, a flash of movement caught his eye. Ilara, armed with nothing but a rock, brought it down with desperate force on Silas's hand, the one holding the artifact. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and Silas screamed, his grip on Lycan's throat loosening. Lycan seized the opportunity, driving his claws deep into Silas's chest. The corrupted alpha gave one last shuddering gasp, and then lay still. As Silas died, the green light in the artifact flickered and died. The corrupted rebels collapsed, the dark magic leaving them, leaving only dead or dying shifters behind. Silence fell over the deadwood, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Lycan pushed himself to his feet, swaying, his eyes finding Ilara. She stood trembling, the bloodied rock still in her hand, her eyes wide with shock. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. In front of his remaining warriors, in front of a humbled and ashamed Kyle, he did not hesitate. He dropped to one knee before her. He took her hand, the one not holding the rock, and brought it to his lips. His voice, when he spoke, was rough with emotion, but it carried across the clearing for all to hear. "You saved us all," he said, his golden eyes shining with a love and reverence that was as vast as the sky. "You are the strength of my pack, the courage of my heart. You are my mate." He rose, pulling her gently toward him. "My queen." And there, amidst the wreckage of their final battle, he lowered his head and marked her, his teeth sinking gently into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, a possessive, eternal claim. The bond between them exploded into life, a brilliant, radiant sun that chased away the last of the shadows. It was a seal not of ownership, but of partnership, a promise forged in the fires of war and redeemed by love. 6 months later, the world was painted in the soft hues of spring. The snow had melted from the peaks of the Shadow Moon Mountains, feeding the streams that now ran clear and full through lands that were slowly healing. The war was over. The heart of corruption had been destroyed, and with Silas's demise, the Sunstone Rebellion had crumbled, its followers either captured, repentant, or scattered to the winds. Peace, a concept that had once been a distant dream, was now a fragile, burgeoning reality. Ilara stood on the grand balcony of the royal citadel, overlooking the sprawling capital city. It was a city of stone and timber, built in harmony with the vast forest that surrounded it. She was no longer the starved, desperate refugee.
She wore the deep silvers and blacks of the Shadow Moon Pack, a simple but elegant gown that marked her as the Luna Queen. Her hair, once matted and dull, now shone in the morning light, and her eyes, once haunted by grief, held a new, quiet confidence. She had found her place, not as a warrior queen, but as a queen of the people. Her Omega nature, once a mark of weakness in the eyes of others, had become her greatest strength. She had an innate capacity for empathy, an intuitive understanding of the pack's emotional needs. She championed the cause of the war orphans and the displaced families, working with Lycan to establish programs that integrated the repentant rebels back into the pack. She brought a softness, a compassion that the war-hardened Shadow Moon Pack hadn't realized it desperately needed. Kale had become one of her most steadfast supporters. Humbled by his near-fatal error in judgment and awed by her courage, he had offered her his unconditional loyalty. He now served as the head of her personal guard, his devotion to his Luna second only to his devotion to his king. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar, comforting scent of pine and winter frost enveloped her. Lycan rested his chin on her shoulder, his large hands covering hers on the stone balustrade. "What is my queen thinking about so seriously?" he murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble against her ear. "I was thinking," she said, her voice soft, "that I never knew a home could feel like this, like peace." "You are my home, Ilara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that still made her heart ache with its intensity. "You are my peace." He had healed too. The weight of being a solitary king had been lifted, shared now between them. The hardness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, abiding warmth that was reserved only for her. He still ruled with strength and authority, but she had taught him the power of mercy, the wisdom of listening. He was a better king, a better man, because of her. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the city below come to life. The smoke that rose from the chimneys was from hearth fires, not pyres. The sounds were of merchants hawking their wares and children laughing, not the clang of steel and the cries of the dying. It was a new world, one they had built together from the ashes of the old. He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes searching hers, still full of a quiet wonder that she had chosen him. "I love you," he whispered, the words no less powerful for their repetition. "And I love you," she replied, rising on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his lips. No longer an enemy on a battlefield, no longer a king and his captive. Just a wolf and his mate, a king and his queen, forever bound by an arrow that had missed its mark, only to strike true in the most unexpected of ways.